All right, and welcome back for another week. We're still in Mod 4. We're talking all about gender today. You have a blog, you have a post, you have a quiz. In just a few weeks, that paper is due. Some of you have started sending me, hey, is this idea okay? That's great, send those along. Some of you have said, will I proofread your paper? Of course, just send them along. With that being said, let us jump into our new chapter, gender development. So talking about a couple different things here. Gender typing, which is really just the process that children acquire their values, motives, and behaviors that they consider appropriate for their gender. Okay, that's gender typing. Gender-based beliefs are the ideas that differentiate males and females, and gender identity is really the perception of oneself as male or female. Gender role preferences, this is like the desire to possess certain gender-typed characteristics. Gender stability is the fact that males remain male and females remain female, and gender consistency is the awareness that superficial alterations in appearance or activity do not alter gender. Two other things we're going to talk about in here are gender stereotypes, which are just the beliefs that members of a culture hold about acceptable and appropriate attitudes, interests, or activities that have to do with either being male or female. And also gender roles, which are a composite of behaviors actually exhibited by a typical male or female in a given culture. So know all of these different terms and the difference between a gender stereotype and a gender role. So let's talk a little about awareness of gender stereotypes. We're aware of gender stereotypes as young as about 2 years old. We've seen that 2-year-olds are surprised by a picture of a male doing something that's stereotypically female. And this really increases a lot between ages 3 and 5. Start to see a lot of inflexibility around gender stereotyping, and like violations cannot occur, and even some extreme thinking. So I have this example here of a mom and her daughter talking, and the mom says, I like to wear dresses, and the daughter says, me too. And then the mom says, does dad like to wear dresses? And the daughter goes, no, dad cannot wear a dress. No, 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 not even if he wanted to. Dads don't wear dresses. So we start to really see some of this inflexible thinking. In around middle childhood, we recognize that gender stereotypes can be violated, but it's not recommended. So this is an example like a 10-year-old boy understands boys can be cheerleaders, but doesn't think it's a great idea. And in adolescence, we understand the occurrences of gender violations, but they're sometimes viewed as extreme or abnormal, particularly among peer groups. Obviously, with a lot of this, it has changed recently. I'm seeing a lot more. I work in an elementary school, and so it hasn't come as much in my school of just some kind of gender fluidity. But working in middle schools and working in high schools, obviously, the ideas around stereotypical male-female gender norms has changed quite a bit, and there's a lot more flexible thinking around that. I have here some slides, slide 8, just around gender differences in behavior between boys and girls. Really with girls, we're seeing more talking, more social interaction, girls being more emotionally competent, while we see boys having some advantages in muscles and really having less inhibitory control and more concerned with dominance rather than friendship, a lot more competition. All right, so next thing on here is gender intensification, which is really just a shift towards more typical gender types patterns of behavior. So if we're thinking about expressive characteristics, often that involves nurturing and concern with feelings, which we see more typically in females. Instrumental characteristics more involve tasks and occupation orientation, and this we typically see more in males. This tends to occur in adolescence with puberty and changing relationships with our parents and our peers. However, there is more research showing less evidence for gender intensification as adolescents might feel less constrained. Thinking about stability over time, individuals who are strongly masculine or feminine at one age tend to continue to be strongly masculine and feminine as they age. So we do see quite a bit of stability. Um, with sex differences in gender typing, boys are more gender typed in play and toy choices than girls, and boys really have a preference for gender stereotyped toys. This remains pretty constant as they age. Girls' interest in gender stereotyped activities decreases as they reach adolescence. Girls become a little bit more knowledgeable and flexible about their stereotypes than boys. All right, let's talk about some different theoretical perspectives. Let's start with a biological one. So we have the evolutionary theory. We pass genes on from one generation to the next, and they need to have mating strategies that enhance those reproductive successes. So, from a evolutionary theory, males need to be more aggressive and have more competitive skills. That way, they get more mates and are able to continue to pass on their genes. For females, strategies for attracting and keeping mates um, who are able to provide resources and protection for their offspring. They also need skills and interests that commit them to really raising children. This doesn't explain diversity of gender development, though. Hormones, less gender typing in females prenatally exposed to male sex hormones and males prenatally exposed to female sex hormones. Another part of the biological perspective I want you to think about is just the brain. Numerous tons of structural differences. Um, Males are more lateralized, females have a larger corpus callosum, females have a greater ratio of gray to white matter, while males have a larger amygdala. Just a ton of different things. There's over 1,000 genes expressed differently in males and females' brains, and just suggests there's some sex differences in brains genetically programmed. Another perspective is the cognitive perspective. You might remember our good friend Mr. Kohlberg and really looking at the cognitive development theory. And so, based on Piaget's theory of cognitive development, children really categorize themselves as female or male on a basis of physical and behavioral cues around them. Then they behave in ways understood to be gender appropriate. Children are using these physical and these behavioral cues and clues to differentiate their gender role and their gender type very early in life. And this is where we see these three phases. It starts with gender identity, labeling ourselves at around 2 or 3. I'm a boy or I'm a girl. Then there's gender stability, understanding gender is the same over time. This starts to happen around 4 or 5. And finally, gender consistency, understanding gender stays the same across contexts and conditions. This happens around 6 or 7. What we're really seeing, though, is the process of understanding gender begins a lot earlier than Kohlberg thought. As young as 17 months to 30 months, most children are using gender labels, but still have a really limited understanding of what gender identity truly is. One more idea from the cognitive perspective is really the gender schema theory. And so this is based on information processing theory, if you remember that one. And we just develop schemas that help us organize and structure experiences related to gender differences and gender roles. And so these schemas are really based on our own perception, information that our parents and our peers and our cultural stereotypes give us. We use these schemas to really explain and evaluate all the behavior we see. The last perspective I want to talk about is socialization. And so with socialization, obviously it's watching and who we're around. So it starts with observational learning. We watch other people and we say, oh, yeah, that's how that gender is acting. That's probably how I should act if I am that gender, or that's how the other gender acts. There's a lot of punishment and reinforcement that happens in this socialization and observational learning process. Positive and negative feedback is really provided by others when behavior is gender appropriate or inappropriate. Parents do have a pretty strong influence on their children's early gender typing, whether it's the name they're given or the decorations in their nursery or the kinds of clothes or toys that they are given. You know, continuing on with socialization, siblings can have an influence on gender typing as well as how the media portrays different genders. Our peers also have a large influence. They are probably one of the strongest influences on a children's gender typed behavior by the time that they're in school. Gender segregation is something that happens. We typically spend more time with our same gendered peers, This we start to see it around age 3, and we just spontaneously start choosing same-gendered play partners. Continues through middle childhood, really declines in adolescence as we begin forming these mixed sex groups and eventually start dating. Girls are more likely to violate those segregations. Um, Boys, we tend to see, are like punished by their peers for violating those stereotypes or those groups. Last piece of this chapter is androgyny, and this is possessing both masculine and feminine characteristics. So, androgynous children and adolescents less likely to make gender type choices off of toys and play activity, actually better adjusted, more creative, higher self esteem, and can be really flexible since they have both traits. So I think that's all we're going to talk about in this gender chapter. It is very just male and female. That's just the nature of this particular book and this particular chapter. I'm excited to read your different blogs and your different posts. If you have any questions, please reach out. Here's the song. See you next time.